I'm John Hitchcock. I'm a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and also an artist, a maker, thinker, also a director of this program called The Studio here, and it's a learning community. I'm originally from a place called Medicine Park in Oklahoma, Lawton Fort Sill area, and I grew up on Comanche tribal lands there. So that influence of that space in relationship to Fort Sill, a military base, which is right across the street from where I grew up, and its influence on the history of the United States and what's currently going on in other parts of the world and that relationship. So I visit Oklahoma quite often to, one, family, but also look at it as a form of what we model in the university setting, research. So what's research mean? And so that's this process of going and looking into trying to create a professional practice from looking at history, your present, and also what's happening in the future. So that place is an amazing source of information constantly for me because of its relationship to tribal communities, but also to the military and the military industrial complex and the complexity of that and how it affects us as humans. I think the studio practice changes from time, from early to, as you get older, like how you make art and think about art changes too by also the place you live and that influence. For me, when I was an undergrad, my studio practice revolved around the school, and I would say 60% of my time was spent making and maybe 20% studying and also 20% as a musician. And I was playing in a lot of bands and doing stuff in clubs and not doing my homework and trying to do my art at the same time. And then it shifts. And when I was in grad school, it shifted to about 70% making and 30% teaching, and also doing all the things you have to do in grad school to learn and being a part of class and all of that stuff too. Now, at this point, I think it's very important to think about how much of your practice actually revolves around um, getting your work out there, PR, dealing with contractual things, dealing with answering emails, and in the professional practice of it. So now it's about 80% business with teaching and probably about 20% actual art making. And so with that, it changes so much. And I try to like have days put aside, Thursday and Friday, that I can dedicate to the making part, and also the weekend too. Depends on the project, the complexity of the project, and what's going on in my life. A long time ago, I was attempting to make it. This is going to age me now. This is back in the 80s and early 90s. I was attempting to make it as a musician, and I was playing in all these punk noise bands and also um, touring around Texas and Oklahoma. And we were opening up for some pretty decent acts at the time. One of them was Tool. We opened up for Pantera, and there was things that I was excited about. That wow, we're gonna like go somewhere with this. And eventually, all of this music business part of it, it just fell apart. And I remember playing one day on stage, and I'm looking around, and I realized like this is not working, and I got to do something. I got to shift my life. And I decided that I needed to go to grad school. I needed to go to grad school in art, and it was something that a cousin of mine and some friends were like saying, they were encouraging me, you need to do this. This is not the direction you need to be in the music. So I went back to my undergrad professor, and Kathy Leontis in Lawton, Oklahoma, at Cameron University, small school, and asked her if it was possible for me to take some classes and um, just sit in and sort of register as a non-credit student. And my first love was lithography, so I wanted to go back and start drawing on the stone and do some plate lithography and experimentation. And at the time, photolitho was starting to be introduced into, this is early 90s within the curriculum there. And so I was very excited about trying photolitho and apply to graduate school. So that failure at music and that not getting, the complex things that I wanted to happen and all the things that I thought would happen, and plus it was just a different time, just forced me to rethink about what I needed to do. And it actually, all of that business of being in bands, playing in clubs, dealing with promoters, dealing with agents, dealing with the system of it, and also performance. Because as an artist, as a maker, you think you sit in a studio and you make all day and you're doing your thing, but you have to interact with all these other individuals that have a stake in this. If it's a gallery, if it's a museum, if it's whatever the entity is, they are working with you, and then you have to present yourself like what we're doing right here, or if we go to a gallery and you have to do a gallery talk, you have to perform. So that idea of performance and being on stage as a musician sort of helped me think about how I would do that as an artist, and how do I also further myself as in a career, not with a whole band, but also as a way of thinking like a group, because you're an organization in some ways because you're dealing with so many people. In grad school, we were encouraged to think in terms of how do you develop this sort of. There was a lot of, we were being introduced to different types of presses that had collaborative shops, and I'm thinking this would be awesome to have a collaborative shop, and then I would make a certain type of artwork and work with different artists that I wanted to and produce their prints. But I didn't really want to produce other people's prints at the time. I wanted to just create my own work, and in relationship with that, and have attachment to this production and this publication. So at the time I was doing sculptural pieces that moved with printed image and also video, and merging those together, and that hybridity, and also being of of different backgrounds. Like I grew up on tribal lands, but I also attended a public school, and then from there, like my mother's side of the family is Comanche and Kiowa, my father's side of the family is German and Dutch, and so that hybridity of being intercultural American, and what does that mean to be this sense of a diverse person, but also the diverse communities that you deal with and you're working with when you move out into the world. And so hybridity and that notion of coming together from these different spaces was the reason. I was fortunate to be invited by Nancy Marie Mythilo, who's a curator who teaches at Occidental College in California, and also is at the Autry Museum. And she was teaching here at the University of Wisconsin. And she has this long-going program to work with indigenous artists to go and represent at the Venice Biennale. And so Venice is the center, in a sense, of contemporary art and experimentation for complex art. And it's been known for this for years. So the honor and the ability to actually represent at this space in Venice, Italy, is sort of huge. And when Nancy put this show together, Epicentral, we were talking about it as an epicenter. And I was thinking in terms of being in a space, but also thinking like an artist, but also thinking about printmaking. Like in printmaking, we work in shops, and in these shops, they're collaborative. And so they're kind of an epicenter too of this activity where things revolve around. They come in, you work with another artist. You're not like in an isolated studio space making work. You're working with all these people around you. It takes, community to make things happen, to make the village move, to bring food in, to bring print, to bring paper in, to bring all the things that you need around you to make your life well and happy. So I'm thinking when I did this show, I had this opportunity to do a solo show, but I invited other printmakers. And that time I invited the guys from Drive By Press, I think Emily Arthur, who is formerly teaching there, John Hancock, Ryan O'Malley down in Texas, and um, it was just sort of, and Joseph Velasquez. and it was just space in Melanie Yazzie in Arizona at the time, but now she's in Colorado. It was bringing also indigenous artists, but also artists that were non-indigenous, but also from other cultural spaces, backgrounds into this complexity again, that hybridization. And so having that and all these voices, and also they were all printmakers or print artists. I don't want to label printmakers, but they are artists who use prints, and so they were able to come and be a part of this show too. And we did them as interventions. And Ryan O'Malley actually went into the community and did wheat pasting. Emily Arthur and I went around with video projectors and we projected onto the walls and onto the various historical buildings with videos that we had made. We also participated, Melanie Yazzie and Emily Arthur and I participated in a month-long residency and in printmaking, so at the Venice Print Studio. And so that was exciting too, to be a part of that. And so it was a really amazing sort of breakthrough space for me and for all of the other artists too. And some of them, I mean, we had not all of everybody had a chance to go, but it was exciting to go there. I guess political artists in the sense of living in this society and going, wow, look what we live in. This is pretty complex. And then the history of printmaking has definitely influenced that. I mean, we could go to Posada, we can look at the history of printmaking in other countries, South Africa, and how that affected the apartheid movement, and how has print culture moved and shifted a society. For me, I think about how print I feel like I'm part of that, but also it's again more complex that we do so many things that it's like to be narrowed down to that. But one of the things that hit me was I went to the National Museum of the American Indian in Washington, D.C. And so I'm walking in the museum and I'm going to the different places of history of different cultures, the Cheyenne people, the Kiowa, and this different. You're going through, and then you hit this area where it's got all of these portraits, and before the portraits, it's a whole series of engravings and woodcuts. And I'm looking at those, and I'm like, this is what I do. I mean, I make prints, and these prints are what has really got me when I was in school. It's like this is motivating me. This is exciting. But I'm looking at these prints, then I realize these are the prints, these etchings and these early depictions were used to go back to report to the colonizers this information and this propaganda and this representation and misrepresentation of people that lived here in the Americas. So when those were first created in that relationship and that happened, and then I'm looking at it, I was like, I can't believe, like, the thing that I love the most is also the same thing that also helped assimilate and have a control over a group of people, indigenous people, my relatives on one side of my family. So I'm thinking that has a huge impact, and that ability of what paper can do, image, and an image can perpetuate an idea and how it's used within a culture. So it really like shifted my thinking, like, oh my God. And that was recent when I saw that. So I think it still has power. Prints have power, and works on paper and literature. All of it still has this power to hit us deep. I think I consider myself a human first. Human being. Good old human being. Artist, brother, maker, uncle, community member. I think we're all these things, and we as you know, as a teacher, as a professor there, that we wear multiple hats, and we walk into the lab and we think we're printmakers, but when we walk out of lab, we're we got to go get gas and put it in the car, and we got to do all these other things that we're dealing with. I think it's is bigger, and that narrowing it down or pigeonholing or putting these labels, because labels limit the complexity of who we are. So why label ourselves always? But deep inside, yes, I'm a printmaker, but I'm also an artist. So they're both. But I love the community and the culture of printmaking, and I think that is what drives me because of the idea of community and how it operates. If you go to the print conferences, or if you go to the different groups that are doing things all over the United States and getting others to come in and be a part of it, it's huge. To me, it's like a problem, sort of like you use the multiple and the larger thinking, like what you go into a venue, and let's say if it's an installation and you've got this wall and this space, and so how do you deal with that space? And it's like exciting to think about the multiple and how the multiple can come together, and strength in numbers builds this community of image. And so when you populate a space, put it on a wall, how does that receive, like how does the viewer receive that information, but also how does the venue that you're installing it receive that too, whether it's internal or external, if it's inside a space or outside a space, how does that act? And so that problem solving is kind of exciting for me. On the other side of it, how do we interact? In my earlier works, I had stuff where you would play games and throw darts at balloons and hoop bottles and receive a little print. And so that little print was a form of propaganda, propagating information that usually had a political, social context that I was getting in your pocket. So you walk away, you'd have a little felt print, sort of like how we have business cards, but this little art is one of a kind that it comes from a fixed matrix, which then allows this other sense of thinking. You can go home, contemplate that image, and I've got my politics in your back pocket. So back to that earlier question of printmaking and its ability to be disseminated, to basically propagate a political, social belief, that really intrigues me. And how do we use that? And I think, how do we um, think in terms of the multiple and how it affects us daily from this thing that we use, not all of us, but the fact that this is movable type and it has the ability to reach so many people so quickly, nationally, internationally. So there's that potential of the multiple and what it can say and do. I don't go into every project thinking like this is going to be this is going to be that. It's like it starts to develop into it. And one in particular, I'm trying to remember the terrible. I can't remember the name of this piece, but I'm looking it up right now online. It was a piece that involved sort of a mound-like shape called Traces of the Plains, and it was at the Rauschenberg Center in New York. And Traces of the Plains became this. It originally was going to be a flatter piece and was going to have video projected on top of it. And I thought of it more as an environment. But then, as I started to draw the small drawings for it and the sketches, it started to become dimensional. Then I started to work with a colleague, Meg Mitchell, here at the university, and she does a lot of 4D modeling and 3D modeling, and we started to use these design programs and build a structure. The structure then turned into this complex wood piece that inside of this, I don't know if he's showing it on the screen right. So underneath all of those pelts, I wanted to represent the buffalo and the fact that the buffalo were totally annihilated at one point, in relationship to indigenous people, the whole idea of genocide. And so, like, what happened to the buffalo, and what happened to indigenous people, what happened to the buffalo too. And so taking these pelts, if you've ever seen this historic photograph of all of these buffalo pelts just stacked up and stacked up and stacked up. So I wanted to stack them, but my only way to get to that point was to build this structure that's inside of this. I'm giving away my tricks. Like, usually the artists are not supposed to give away their tricks, but internally inside of that is this modeled wooden structure that holds it all together, and the buffalo pelts are on top of it. And the pelts are actually made out of naga hide And I wanted to use synthetic materials too to reference this idea of our culture shifting and all these different types of materials that we use that are basically they're not able to be destroyed. They're going to be in landfills, and their potential to live forever is there. So anyway, that turned into this giant sculpture thing that I didn't expect to happen, and it went that direction. It was all by trial and error, and then all of a sudden collaborating with other artists, and their thinking started to come into my mindset. I think that's the other thing about when you're making something is your idea might become even more complex when you listen to someone else's advice and actually take it and see where that can go. I think we're very sometimes protective of our art, and we're protective of our idea. Reality is that we're already grabbing those ideas from other places, and so the ability to allow ourselves to use, I guess you would say, and appropriate another person's views and make something new with it, turn that around. I think spontaneity plays an important part, and it might be because of a musician background and jamming with people, and that idea of like how you lay one thing down, like somebody might put a bass line down, and then all of a sudden the cymbals come in, and then all of a sudden the kick drum, is thumping, boom, boom, and then you get to put a layer on top of that. And so to me, when I'm making the installations, I'm thinking the same way, but there's an overall pattern that's happening. Just in music, there's a pattern that describes the larger space we're going. So this thing's happening, things are rolling along, and all of a sudden somebody takes you down another road. So I like that spontaneity of if I'm doing something like a scattered type of thing, I'll start throwing things down and then building on it, and then it creates its own composition. So it's like drawing. So the installations to me become these big drawings, and they have the ability to move and maneuver through space. And then if I'm working with a team, like collaborating with students or with community members, depends on like where the project's at, then the community will come in and help set up the show too. And so they may say, that's your wall, put some things on it and arrange a pattern and go do it. And then I'll put some stuff with it too. So then it becomes sort of like jazz, I guess you would say. It would just things will start happening here, something happens over here, and then it starts moving in and out, and then all of a sudden it builds a larger piece. But then I think about drawing that way on paper too. So I do demos I do demos in my class. I'll combine screen printing and relief and dyeing paper and start to layer things, and then after I layer them, I'll come back and then draw back into them and clarify things. And so I think in the end, the aesthetics starts to play a huge part of how do you clarify this to make it look, acceptable. And then what is acceptable? What is the standards of acceptance? It's like you have your own sort of points of what you consider as making something clear so a viewer looks at it, or you develop them. Everybody develops their own methods and ways of thinking, but they also develop a way of making the work look a certain way so that viewers, will get it. And what criteria do you live up to in the work? That's what I'm looking at too. This is a question I think that's complex because we in academia use the word research as what we're trying to reach a sort of academic rigor to create something original. So you're always sort of pressed to come up with something that is original. So how do you create a strong, solid body of artwork that clarifies conceptually your ideas, your directions, and a fresh approach? So a fresh approach is key. Like, how do you find that? I'm thinking in terms of these are things that are asked of us in the institution, but it's also asked of graduate students, and it's asked of you in the field. Like, if you are a leading artist in the field, then these are things that I would think these things that you're creating original work. So that would be considered research. But also research could be the working methods, the model, the ethics. How do you establish and explore the concept, the standards and quality, your habits, your materials, the techniques, the work you're making. Like those working methods of research, those models are huge. And then you have to have a vision. So there's a vision for a future, understanding your past. Be aware of historical references that support a direction. So the field is huge. You find your place in that field, and where do you see yourself, but also where do you see how you contribute, but also what's the understanding of where you fit culturally, socially, politically, conceptually, art theory, abstract artists, whatever it is. Like, how do you define that? And then how do you break out of the definitions and challenge that history? So it's a big task. These are things that are asked of the graduate student. It's asked of you as an artist if you weren't in graduate school. So it's the same thing. Like, what's your vision? What's your future? And then being active. So in understanding that past, knowing that you come from a history. We had an artist come in, Mickalene Thomas, and one of her best things that I thought she said in her talk, and she gave this information to the students. She said, look at your influences, but don't just look at your influences. Look at the people who influenced them, your influences influence, because there's a history and a lineage that you come from that's embedded in the knowledge and also the making of that artist, but it's in the artist. So who's the artist that came before the artist that came before that artist? So look at that history, that long trajectory, and then how do you react? How are you active? How are you innovative? How do you do something in the field? How do you challenge the system? Think critically. Do you understand where you are? Where do you fit? And also being strong, developing thick skin, because people are mean. People are mean. Everybody's mean. Not everybody, but there's a lot of mean people in the world. So developing thick skin to know that there's going to be a lot of people that are not nice. And then responsibility of your career. And it's a profession, and we tend to forget that you have to dedicate time to documentation, business, all the stuff that an artist has to do to develop. And especially if you're an independent artist doing these things outside of a support network, you have to create your whole support network. And how do you create that support network? And how do you become an entrepreneur to do these things? How are you able to sustain life, sustain this? We don't think about this so much in school because we're in school and the structure is all set up. And we have an artist I was working with yesterday in my class that he's an independent artist, and he has a shop here in town where he's doing large scale sculpture. And that sculptural stuff is all within the community and how he operates. And he was basically saying that he works 7 days, about 16 to 15 hours a day to 10, just on making and getting his business going in the community. I think it's alive and exciting, and there's so much happening. It's always moving. It's moving. There's always things getting churned up. The wheels are turning. It's pulling something else in. People are moving around. Different spaces, things happening. You get big artists like Swoon. Everybody knows who Swoon is, in most cases in the print world. Um, that movement of the kind of work that she's done in communities again, but also hitting the larger major galleries and museums. Nicola Lopez, another artist that's done the same thing too, using print as a vehicle to make large-scale sculpture and installation and environment pieces, to younger artists like Crystal Wagner, who's on that trajectory. And I think that keeps younger artists in line to think, wow, there's this potential, there's this possibility. The internet, obviously, we're able to communicate and do this kinds of things like what you're doing, Zach, to bring this awareness and thinking in terms of how we use print and how do we use the multiple and how do we push that direction. Collaborative shops in the Midwest, there's huge amount of collaborative shops here to independent shops, like High Point Center for Printmaking in Minneapolis, university shops here, Tandem Press. All these different spaces are creating also venues for students post undergrad and grad school to work at and to be a part of that community, or inspire them to create their own shop, like Bill Fick in Super Graphics and what he's doing um, on the east side, East Coast, and how that's starting to develop up and create this other space. And I think it's amazing. It's a lively time. It's very alive. Oh, lots. I got like a huge list. But um, Terry Allen, who's an artist from Texas, lives in New Mexico now. Jimmy Durham, Eric Avery. Jimmy Durham's a Cherokee artist who actually lives in, I think, Belgium now. Eric Avery's he's a medical, he's a psychologist as well as a printmaker, but he uses printmaking as a way of thinking about healing communities. And so when I first was exposed to his work in the 80s, I was just blown away by his generosity, but also being a medical doctor and an artist. Chip Thomas, who's also a medical a doctor, as well as doing wheat pasting on the Navajo Nation, the Four Corners area. So um, Sukkot, James Luna, Jean Quick-to-See Smith, Edgar Heeperbergs, Guillermo Gomez Pena, T.C. Cannon, Fritz Scholder, a lot of indigenous artists that have pushed me to think about what's my place in this space, what's my purpose in academia as an artist, and what's my responsibility, and what's that responsibility to a community again, and what's that responsibility to myself and then where I'm from, and also the larger space. Writers, Sherman Alexie and Scott Momaday, Guillermo Gomez Pena, again, indigenous writers who have made me think about um, ways of seeing the Western canon, but also ways of how do we change that canon. And then those who are in those spaces, how they shifted. Coco Fusco, Bell Hooks, Lucy Lepard, three other writers that have influenced me too, that also ask the questions about the Western canon and contemporary art that we live in. We live in this space where we're taught from this perspective, but how do we shift and change that? And I think sometimes it's responsibility of artists to come in, and especially within academia, to help move that in another direction and to think broader and think about the complexity of culture and where we all come from. And Dave Hickey, um, very much had a somewhat as a writer influence. Ann Hamilton, installation artist. And then there's music too. There's all this music. Like there's a band called Low, Dinosaur Jr., Guided by Voices, Jesus Lizard, noise bands, all this stuff that I to me influences me, and it's a huge part of where it hits.